Chacham, Yeshiva University, want to go to Yeshiva. I always reminisce about my personal time in Yeshiva University, and it's true that I got to hear Rabbi Twersky speak on a number of occasions, and both in person as well as through hundreds of and recorded shiurim. One of the wonderful things about being a Torah institution, is true even of a small place like this, is that there are so many teachers of Torah that you don't really get a chance to have shiurim from everybody on a regular basis. One of the beautiful things about Yeshiva University, which I used to pinch myself when I was a bacher, I was 18, 19, 20 years old, walking down the streets of Amsterdam Avenue and right around the whole YU orbit over there. So you literally walk down the street and there's walking Sifrei Torah on every block as you cross the street. You see one Sefer Torah, another Sefer Torah. The Gemara says how foolish people are that they stand up on a Sefer Torah, walks in the room, but they don't stand up necessarily with the same level of intensity when a Gavra Rabba walks into the room, when a great person walks into the room. The definition of a Gavra Rabba is not only somebody who knows a lot of Torah, that's part of being a Gavra Rabba, but also a person who is a sensitive person, a person who makes other people feel bigger than they are. The Gemara gives an example of what a Gavra Rabba is that if you see that the Chazal were able to take what the Torah says, Arboim Yakenu, that the Torah says she had 40 makos, if you violate an Israel that gets makos, the Chazal come on, they say actually it's 39. From where you see that a Gavra Rabba isn't just someone who knows a lot of Torah, but someone who takes away a makkah from another Jew, takes away a little bit of pain from another Jew. So it's a personal kavod to have someone who is not only a Gavra Rabba in the sense of the amount of Torah that they know, but also the sensitivity and sweetness with which they present the Torah, to take the Torah, which is so big and is so great, and sometimes feels so daunting, and to be able to package it in a way where we're able to encabble it with the ne'imus and the sweetness. Without further ado, the kavod gadol.
Thank you very much. Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi. We're going to begin by looking at a halacha from the Rambam, which deals with Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. That's obviously a topic that would be well deserving of a shir, but we're actually going to, in context of this halacha, we're going to focus on something which is relatively tangential in context of this halacha to get to the theme that we want to try to explore and develop briefly. The Rambam writes as follows: Yesh dvarim acherim she'en b'chal chilul Hashem. There's yet earlier in this parak the Rambam has outlined two types of chilul Hashem, desecrating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, and now he concludes the parak with a third way in which Rahman al-Itzlan that can happen. For who? How does this type of chilul Hashem, Rahman al-Itzlan, materialize? Sheyasa osam odom godol b'Torah meforsim b'chasidus. A person is great in Torah and has quite a reputation in terms of his devoutness. And what he does, sheyasa devarim shahabrios meranan and achra b'shvilam, he sets tongues wagging with his questionable or unseemly behavior. V'afal pi she'enon averos. Now the behavior under question, the Rambam says, don't technically constitute sins. But nevertheless, because it's unbecoming, because it's unseemly, because it's inappropriate for a person of that stature, so for instance, we'll skip one line, and the Rambam gives several examples. We'll skip one line to the second example he gives. Sheyabe b'schok, he's involved with frivolity. O ba'achila u'shasiya etzel ameh ha'oretz u'beinehen, he goes tailgating before the football game on Sunday. Osha diburo im habrios eno benachas. He doesn't speak in a gentle refined way. Ve'enu makablam b'sevet panim yafos. He doesn't greet people warmly, graciously. Elabal ktata v'kas. He's a contentious individual. He's an individual who's prone to anger. So these types of behavior, when practiced by a person whom the Rambam describes as Gadol b'Torah, he's great in Torah knowledge, u'meforsim b'chasidus, and he has a reputation for devoutness, create, Rachmana litzlan, a chil Hashem. Conversely, v'chein, towards the end of line 5, I'll say, im dikdek ha-chacham al atzmo, if the Chacham is exceedingly careful with his behavior, and on the contrary, v'haya dibura b'nachas im habriyos, when he speaks gently, in a refined way. V'daitum urevesim mahem, he's relatable, people relate to him. U'mekablam b'sev v'panim yafos, and he greets people warmly. V'nelav mehem be'eno olvam, if it happens that he's insulted, he doesn't respond in kind. Mechabed lahen, he's respectful to everyone. Afilu l'mekilim lo, even those who perhaps treat him without the proper measure of respect. No seven, no sin be'emunah, with he conducts his business with uncompromising integrity, etc. So then, such an individual is Hareza Kiddush Hashem. Okay, fine. So it's sort of point and counterpoint, right? The Rambam has the contrast. But here's what we want to notice. When the Rambam was describing, again, it's the same individual, right? The same individual, great in Torah learning, with a reputation for chasidus, for devoutness. When the Rambam's describing him, Rachmana litzlan, being guilty of a chil Hashem, so in line 1, how does the Rambam describe him? As Gadol b'Torah u'meforsim b'chasidus. That's the phrase he uses. Great in Torah knowledge, and again, with a reputation for devoutness. When he describes this same individual, the same profile, but his behavior is impeccable, the Rambam refers to him at the end of line 5 as Chacham. Why the change? Again, we're talking about the same, sort of the starting point is we're talking about the same individual, right? The same person who's great in Torah knowledge, with a reputation for devoutness. So we're talking about the same person, and then we describe him going in either of two opposite directions. Either his behavior is unseemly, inappropriate, unrefined, in which case, Rachmana litzlan, it generates a chil Hashem, or he heads in the other direction. His behavior is sensitive, refined, gentle, in which case he makes a Kiddush Hashem. So why, in the one case, does the Rambam describe him as Gadol b'Torah u'meforsim b'chasidus? And the other time he just says very succinctly that he's a Chacham. The question clear, Rabbi? Now you could have said that maybe once the Rambam gives us the more elaborate phrase, so he says it with shorthand the second time. Okay, but I think we would have known that Chacham implies Gadol b'Torah if the Rambam would have said it the first time also. So I think that the question warrants an answer, and we'll see that there's something profound which is reflected in the Rambam's choice of words. There's nothing incidental or casual in the Rambam's phraseology. So the next source we want to jump around a little bit in is drawn from the Rambam's introduction to his Perush HaMishnayos. So the Rambam in the introduction to Perush HaMishnayos basically has an introduction to the history of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's a very, very fundamental source. One of the things he does in that introduction to Perush HaMishnayos is he tells us about Agadata and how Agadata needs to be interpreted. We're not going to see how this links up to that goal of the Rambam. We're just sort of parachuting in for what's relevant to us. But in that context, the Rambam, we're coming in the middle of the discussion, the Rambam began the discussion by saying that the philosophers raise a very basic question of what's the purpose of everything that was created. What's the purpose of Hashem's creation? And until now, the Rambam has presented and argued their position that the purpose for everything in our world is for us. It's here to serve us. It's here to serve as a support system for us. Now, granted, on a summer night when there's a mosquito buzzing around your ear, you sometimes wonder about this, but there are good answers to that question as well. So that's where we're jumping in here midstream to the Rambam's discussion. The Kasha Yadanu, do you see it there on line 1 or no? Again, we're going to be jumping around here. Again, it's here if you want to sort of fill in later, so by all means, that would be wonderful. The Kasha Yadanu, once we've known, Shetachlis Kol Eila, that the telos, the purpose of everything, Kol Eila, all these, everything else in our world, He Mitzias Ha'adam, is for man, Chova, so then the natural follow-up inquiry is, Shenach Gam Madua Nimtza Ha'adam U'Matachliso. So what's the purpose of man? What are we here for? Again, skipping now to, I think it's line 8. Do you see where it says, Va'od Shekol HaPu'ulos? Towards the end of line 8, Rabbi, if you see it. Va'od Shekol HaPu'ulos Ha'ela, everything else that a person, that we eat, that we build houses, most of what people do is not really uniquely human. Okay, so birds build nests, and we build houses. It's not fundamentally different. $2 million difference. But other than that, it's not really, give or take $2 million, it's not really fundamentally different, building a nest or building a house. Our physical lives, animals engage in the same range of physical activities. They have the same physical pleasures and the same urges and drives that we do. There's nothing singularly human about any of this. Kol ha'pu'ulos ha'ela, right, you see where we are again, beginning in the 8th line down, mishutafos hein, they're shared, they're common, lo, to man, ulashor mine ba'alei chayim. There's only one thing that's uniquely human. Only one thing that distinguishes us from the animals. Vahamada, knowledge. When a person attains knowledge, and as the Rambam's about to say, all knowledge points to and culminates in recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Yedias Hashem, in Emunah b'Hashem, Hamada hu shemosef b'mahuso. When a person attains knowledge, that is something which upgrades the person. Ma'atiko, it moves him mimatzav lematzav, from one station to another. Mimatzav shofel, from a lowly station, lematzav na'ala, to a higher station. Now look at this next phrase. The Rambam has this in a couple of places. Lefi shehoya adam bekoach v'nasa adam befoal. We're not born in a philosophical sense. We're not born human. We're born with a potential to be human. But that potential has to be actualized. If I live my whole life, and my whole life is focused on the physical, I never really became human. Okay, so I walk upright, and animals walk on all four, but it's not such a, you can train an animal to walk, upright also. A person becomes human. He was Adam B'Koach. He was only human in terms of potential before he attains knowledge. And through the knowledge, Nasa Adam B'Foal, he becomes a person. He becomes a man in actuality. Sheha'odam lifnei sheyomad, a person with zero knowledge, and again, the ultimate in knowledge, the summit of knowledge, is Yedias Hashem, Einu Elike Behema. He's no different than a behema. You know, eating with a knife and a fork as opposed to eating with your hands. Okay, it's a good thing to do. It's definitely advocated, but I'm not sure that really catapults a person and elevates him and differentiates him from the animal. Kilo nivdal ha'odam mish'or ba'alei hachayim ele behigayon. What differentiates man from animals is knowledge, understanding. Ritzoni, I just skipped one phrase with the third line from the end of the paragraph. Ritzoni b'milas higayon hasagas hamuskalos. Attaining knowledge, understanding. V'godol sheba muskalos, and what's everything pointing to? All the logic, all the understanding, all the reflecting on nature. What's it all? Where does it all converge? What's the peak of knowledge? V'gadol sheba muskalos hasagas achtos habore yisalav yishtabach. Fine. So what's the answer to the question? What are we here? We're here to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have Yedias Hashem. Right? That's what I'm saying. And it's that which is the unique human capacity, and that's what we're here for, to realize that capacity. Good? Now, skip to the paragraph. Do you see Hine Nizbara, the third paragraph here? Do you see that, Rabbi say? Skip to that paragraph for a minute, and let's just read most of the first line carefully. Hine Nizbara mikol ha'akdama sa'ela, what's been clarified, what's been established from these various premises, shehatachlis ba'olamenu zeh, v'chol asher bo, that the ultimate telos, the goal for everything in this world, everything is here for man, and what's man here for? For Yedias Hashem. So the ultimate goal of this world is hu ish melumad. But wait a minute, there's a little bit of bait and switch here. Baal midos tovos. Where did the midos tovos come from? No, the argument the Rambam presented was an argument that explained for ish melumad. Where did the Baal Midas Tovos come in? Did you see the question, Rabbi? So let's go back to the previous paragraph. Aval im, so paragraph number 2 here, Rabbi. Im hasogas hamuskalos, when a person attains knowledge, chova, it's obligatory, lintosh, to abandon. Es hahagzama, excess, b'ta'anugos hagufanios. It becomes obligatory. A person recognizes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person learns Torah, that obligates him to moderate, to abandon the excess in physical pleasure. If a person, I skipped a few words in line 2, if a person is bent on catering to all his urges and drives that we all experience, if the person is bent on accommodating all those urges and drives, and he prioritizes sensual pleasure, and his seichel becomes subordinate to those urges and desires. Skipping to the end of the line, lo yuka bo hakoach eloki. The seichel, the koach eloki, has been muted, has been overshadowed. It's not discernible. Or in other words, the Rambam tells us here something extraordinary. And that's where that's how the Rambam in the next paragraph says that the goal of the world is not just the person who has Yedias Hashem, but the person who has Yedias Hashem, and it's reflected in his behavior. Or in other words, the fundamental idea the Rambam is telling us, and it's virtually impossible to exaggerate the importance of this idea. Learning, which has obviously occupies such a central position in our tradition, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, learning which obviously involves intellectual effort and thought and analysis. Ultimately, learning is something more than an intellectual endeavor. Learning Torah, really, if it's authentic, is something metaphysical where the Torah becomes a part of a person such that it's then reflected in his behavior. If a person can learn Torah, but then there's a gap, there's a disparity between his Torah and his behavior, so maybe he knows a lot, but it's not Torah. And that's what the Rambam says, that on the one hand, the goal is what makes us uniquely human, the hasagas hamuskalos is that the person has understanding, he has Yedias Hashem, but he only really has Yedias Hashem if you can see that in his behavior. If you can't see it in his behavior, if you can't discern it in his behavior, we need a different word for it. It's not Chochmas HaTorah. It's something masquerading as Chochmas HaTorah. It's some kind of intellectual achievement. It's not Chochmas HaTorah. Maybe I'll just read you one source, which I'm sorry I forgot to put on the sheet. It's in Perek Hey of Hilchos Deos in the Rambam. I hope you'll take a look at it later. Just one line, two lines. Kishem, just as Shehechacham Nikar B'Chochmaso Uvedei Osav V'hu Muvdal Behen Mishor Ha'am, just as the Chacham is discernible in terms of his knowledge. Like his knowledge is just so impressive, so dazzling. Kach tzarech, if he's a Chacham, kach tzarech she'yeh nikar b'masav, he should also stand out in terms of his actions, in terms of his behavior. Everything, the entire range, b'ma'acholo, how he eats, b'mashkeo, how he drinks, b'vilaso, his private married life, u'ba'asiyas tzrochav, even how he attends to his needs in the bathroom, b'diburo, in his speech, b'hilucho, how he walks, b'malbusho, how he dresses, u'b'chilkul dvarav, how he weighs his words, u'b'maso, b'matono, how he conducts business, v'yu kol ha'maisim ha'elu. All these, again, the entire range. The Rambam runs the gamut. All these actions should be na'im u'mesukon b'yoser, should be especially refined and especially beautiful. Let's come back for a moment to that question which we asked on the Rambam in Perek Hey Yesodei HaTorah. What was the question, Rabbi say? What was the question that we had posed? Right, it's the same profile. And the first time we get this elaborate phrase of Godol B'Torah Meforsim V'Chasidus, and the second time we get the succinct word of Chacham. So now, I think we're in a position to answer that question, right? Because the individual whose behavior is not refined, is unseemly, is inappropriate, he's not a Chacham. He may know a lot, he may have lots of yediyas. Intellectually, he may be impressive, but he doesn't. A Chacham, he isn't. Only when the Rambam is describing the person with all the yediyas, but whose behavior is beautiful and inspiring and refined, that individual, the Rambam describes as a Chacham. How clever fellow. How the Rambam's care and precision in choice of words. Extraordinary. The same idea, we're not going to read the whole thing inside, that the Rambam talks about the pasuk in Yirmiyahu. It's a pasuk known to us from the Haftorah of Tisha B'Av, where the Navi says, if you take a look, if you see here on page 2, oh boy, how many lines is this? You see here on page 2, 18 lines from the bottom. I'll read quickly before you count and try to catch me on that. Okay. Hine bi'aru lanu hanaviyim. It's after a comma, around the 6th or 7th word into the line. Hine bi'aru lanu hanaviyim. You see that, Rabbi? How many lines down? How many was it? What? How many lines up was it? Did anyone count? Okay, anyway, we'll call it Chai. Okay, 18 lines up from the bottom. Hine bi'aru lanu hanaviyim gam heim elu inyanim ba'atzmam. Earlier the Rambam quoted it from the philosophers, and he says it's a pasuk in Navi. Upirshu osam lanu k'moshe yefoshim ha'filosofim. Va'amu lanu b'feirush she'ein shleimus hakinyan. That there are 4 areas in which a person can sort of reach the summit. One is in terms of amassing wealth. Shleimus hakinyan. He's the richest person in the world. And the other is a person can reach the summit in terms of shleimus brios haguf. He's a specimen of health and vigor and a bodybuilder, etc. And the third is shleimus hamidos, which isn't rooted in Yedias Hashem. He behaves nicely, behaves very well, but it's not connected to belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So none of these is something shera'ui lehispa'er ulehispalel bo. None of these is something that a person should really take pride in as an ultimate accomplishment. V'shahashleimus shera'ui lehishalel bo ulevaksha hu yedias Hashem yizbarach. The attainment, the peak attainment that a person should be gratified to have accomplished is Yedias Hashem, to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Yirmiyahu, Ko amar Hashem, al Yishalel, ki im bezos Yishalel, ha-misalel haskel v'yodo osi. Again, similar to Perishah Mishnayos, so what's the ultimate? Haskel v'yodo osi. But then the Rambam says, take a look at the 3rd line from the end. V'achash zacharnu. We're on the 3rd line from the bottom here on page 2. Achash zacharnu zeh posuk, masha kolel min ha'inyanim haniflaim. We've mentioned this posuk and how many wonderful ideas are compressed into this posuk. Nashlim kol mashu kolel. Let's finish the posuk. V'zeh shelo hispik lo bozeh ha'posuk leva'eh shehasogosol yisbarach levad hi ha'nechbeder sheb'shleimuyos. The posuk doesn't end there. When the posuk says ki im bezos yishalel ha'mishalel haskel v'yodo osi, this is what a person should, not in a boastful sense, not in an egotistical sense. This is what a person should take pride in, having Yedias Hashem. The pasuk doesn't end there. The pasuk continues, but rather he should take pride in ki ani Hashem oseh chesed u'mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz ki ve'elech chafatzti ne'um Hashem. So the Yedias Hashem isn't alone, doesn't suffice. Ki ilu hoisa zos kavanah. So if that's what Yirmiyahu Navi meant, haya omer ki im bezos yishalel hamishalel, top of page 3, haskel v'yodo osi v'haya posek dvarav. Period. Oh, if he wanted to continue, he would have said, haya omer haskel v'yodo osi kani echad, referred to again the Yedias Hashem. Achar kach, skipping to line 7, the end of the line. V'achar kach is an abbreviation of us. Line 7 from the top. V'achar kach hishlim ha'inyan v'omar ki ve'elo chafatzti ne'um Hashem omar b'chesed b'mishpat u'tzedakah chafatzti ne'um Hashem. The word of Hashem, ritzon aloma shekavanasi. It's my intent. Kaviyachol, my desire, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking, sheyetze mikem chesed mishpat utztaka ba'oretz. So that is the measure, that's indispensable for the Yedias Hashem to be authentic. If the Yedias Hashem doesn't translate, if you don't have that congruence between the Yediyah and the belief and the behavior, so that again, it's counterfeit Yediyah. It's a Yediyah which has been cut off from its roots. Same idea, right? Chachma, because Talmud Torah is not supposed to be something purely intellectual. It certainly is heavily intellectual, but it's not purely intellectual. Ultimately, Talmud Torah means that the person absorbs the Torah into his soul, and because of that, it translates, and you see it in his actions, you see it in his behavior. Now, a similar idea, I don't know if it's identical, but similar idea we had in yesterday's Kriyas HaTorah in the Ibn Ezra's commentary. So the last of Aseres HaDibros is Lo Sachmo, don't covet. It's a famous passage in the Ibn Ezra. Take a look, it's the final source here on page 3. It's the final source, that means there's a light at the end of the tunnel that he's going to stop talking soon. So this is good, I will say. We're up to the final source, so take a look here. Lo Sachmo, Anoshim Rabim Yismuhu Al Zosa Mitzvah. Many people are perplexed about this mitzvah. Lo Sachmo is a mitzvah, it's a negative commandment. So many people are perplexed by this mitzvah. Ech yeh adam shlo yachmel davo yafe belibo kol ma shehu nechmad l'mari einov. The Ibn Ezra says, when a person does something, so he makes a conscious decision to do it. So you can regulate that and tell him, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want you to do it. He says in the Torah not to do it. So therefore, even though you want to do it, so suppress it. Right? Because it's a deliberate decision. It's a conscious decision to do something. But chimud, coveting, is just an instinctive reaction. So imagine the following scene. So imagine, Rahman al-Islam, you have a poor, really destitute, homeless individual. And it's a bitter, cold winter night. And he's walking the streets in a futile attempt to somehow keep warm. He's hungry. He hasn't had a solid meal in days. And he walks by this beautiful house. The shades are up so he can see into the house. It's well lit. He sees this beautiful fire in the fireplace. It's obviously so warm inside because people are sitting in their shirt sleeves. No one is bundled up in a coat or even a sweater for that matter. And they're enjoying a beautiful meal, replete with delicacies. So he doesn't make hineni muchanam zuman machmod. He doesn't make a conscious decision. It's not a deliberate reaction to covet. It just happens. It's instinctive, right? Eich yeh adam shelo yachmod dav v'yafeh b'libo. You can't l'chora legislate against an instinctive reaction, right? That's the question that people pose with regard to Lo Sachmod. Va'ata, line 2, says the Ibn Ezra, etem l'chamoshel. I'm going to give you an example. A little bit of a parable. Da. No, ki ish kfari. You have a villager. Sheyesh lo deo nachona. Das nachona. He's in his right mind. He's not insane. He's in his right mind. V'hu ro'a bas melech shehi yafa. He sees a beautiful princess. Lo yachmod osa beliba sheyishkav ima. He doesn't covet that he should marry the princess. Ki yeda ki zeh lo yitachen. No, royalty don't marry lowly, untitled, ignorant villagers. It doesn't happen. It's not within the realm of possibility. He knows that, and because he knows that, he's not chomed. What's the principle? The principle is that it's true that chimud happens as an instinctive reaction, but we're only chomed, we only covet what's within the realm of possibility. What we know to be impossible, we don't covet. But al tachshov, to think that Zeh HaKfari would covet, that this villager would covet marrying the princess, you'd have to think shehu ke'echad min ha'meshugim. You'd have to think that Nebuch, he was insane. She is avish yelo knafayim lo of hashamayim, who's flapping his arms in an attempt to fly, to soar into the sky like a bird. What's the nimshal? What's the analog? Kocha, line 5. Kol maskil tzarch sheyeda. Every discerning individual should know ki isha yafa, whether it's a wonderful wife in every respect, including physical beauty, or mammon, or wealth, lo yimtza'enu odom ba'vo chachmasa v'daito. It's not that the person is able to achieve that result autonomously, that he is able to generate that result. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu apportions, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu allocates. And therefore, ubav wazeh, I'm skipping a line and a half, hamaskil lo yis'ave v'lo yachmod. This, the discerning individual, he doesn't covet, because he knows that one can no sooner overturn what HaKadosh Baruch Hu decrees than one can flap one's arms and fly, or that the villager can marry the princess. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. But as beautiful as this explanation is, there's a gap. Because I think that, I don't know, in personal experience, I don't know, I think sometimes we would subscribe to the Ibn Ezra's presentation of divine providence, of Hashgacha Pratis, but I think sometimes we are chomed. So how does that not refute what he's saying? You hear the question what I was saying? So the answer clearly is, the Ibn Ezra is assuming, and maybe that's what the words even yeda imply for him, kol maskil tzarich sheyeda, that what we know, we internalize. Right? This answer, this explanation of the Ibn Ezra responds satisfactorily to the question only if you assume that what I know and believe, I internalize, it becomes a part of me, such that it then shapes my instinctive reactions. If my belief in Hashgacha Pratis is only such that, yes, it's something I intellectually subscribe to, if you'll give me a questionnaire, I'll check, do you believe in individual divine providence? Check the yes box. Next question. If that's, and genuinely, and I do that not disingenuously, I do believe it. I do believe it. I check the yes box. But if that's the extent of it, then the Ibn Ezra's answer to the question doesn't meet the question. The Ibn Ezra is assuming, and again, here's the similarity to the idea we had in the Rambam, that what a person knows is a part of him. If I know this Hashgacha Pratis, and I don't just know it again as an intellectual proposition, but it's a part of me, so then that will shape and mold my reactions. Then I don't covet my friend's wife. I don't covet his wealth, because I know that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu allocated to him. It's intended for him. It's not intended for me. And I don't covet. So you see, again, the same yesod, the same, again, profound principle operative here in the Ibn Ezra as well, that what it means to learn and to know is to make it, is that it becomes, is something metaphysical. It's not just cognitive. Cognitive is just, it's in my mind. Metaphysically, it's a part of me. And as such, then there's not going to be any gap, there's not going to be any daylight between my belief or my knowledge and my behavior. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Be Matzliach.